that's us at Mainstream. As you just heard, we operate out of Campbell River. There's about 13 of us there. We do a wide variety of things. We have a wildlife biologist, a few freshwater biologists, and I do most of our marine work. That falls into things from the guy down the street that wants to put a dock in to an effluent pipe to we do the bulk, I guess, or most of the benthic monitoring underneath aquaculture facilities in BC. And I also do the bulk of wild juvenile salmon collection and analysis for sea lice infestation that's industry supported in BC. So I've been asked to come and talk to you today about a couple things. One, what we see in the Broughton Archipelago, specifically from 2001 to 2021. And also, I was given the data from the Klemtu area, and we'll have a look at that. One other thing, before I get into a little bit more about me, is I'm not a doctor. I'm just a guy that likes to catch fish, weigh them, measure them. So I'm lucky if I get called sir or mister occasionally. Most times it's worse than that. But so you know where I'm coming from, I was basically born and raised in Campbell River. That's a couple pictures of me in a former life when I was a little bit younger, different types of hair. Those are two people that are critical in my life and have led to, like you said, I'm a salmon person. I'm in love with wild salmon, and that leads to a lot of what I do. The picture on the far right there, that is probably the last adult Chinook salmon I caught. That's about 2003 or 2004. If you're familiar with the Tyee Club down in Campbell River, we try and capture Tyes, fish a Chinook over 30 pounds with a line that breaks at 20 pounds. And that gentleman with me is my dad. And my dad died about 5 years ago now. My dad took me fishing just about every day of my life that I can remember. We fished trout from an early age. He was lucky enough to be self-employed, so he would come home in June and all through July and August, and I'd be waiting there with the boat hooked up and we'd head out fishing. I know Dick thinks he knows what's going on with coho, but I think my dad and I might have been responsible for a lot of the decline in coho salmon around Campbell River, because that's what we did almost exclusively growing up with my dad. The other picture, and that is a little bit older because you can see I'm a little bit younger. That's about 1994, maybe 95, because I lost that really cool Indiana Jones hat on the Salmon River steelheading when I just about put my dad and me under a log jam. So after 95, that hat didn't exist. The person standing beside me in that one is my boss at Mainstream Biological. So she started Mainstream Biological in 2020. She's one of the smartest freshwater biologists that I know. She is also my wife. So she's kind of my double boss, I like to say. She's my boss at work and she's my boss at home. And if I say something really dumb during this presentation and you get a hold of Mainstream Biological, I'll be doubly in trouble. So let's hope I don't do that. Okay, so now let's talk about what goes on and a little bit more about what goes on the whole coast. So there's a map of kind of the southern coast of BC. The red dots are what we're going to call industry-supported juvenile salmon sampling locations. So there's 191 of them. Up here at the top is what we're going to talk about. I don't do this sampling, so I've just been given the data. When we get to the data from Klemtu, I have been up here sampling, but it was way back in about 2010 or 2011 maybe. And the other area I don't do is right there around Port Hardy. There's 20 sites there. The rest of the red dots, Mainstream Biological samples. So we do the remaining 155 sample locations. So we are kind of ramping up now. Come April, we're pretty busy through June doing all the rest of those little red dots. This is typically, if you haven't sampled for wild juvenile salmon, this is typically how it's done all over the coast. You take a small boat, in our case it's a whaler. Your beach seine net is about 46 meters long. It's 3.5 meters deep. You do a little circle with your boat. You pull it in by hand, and then most often we're bagging fish out of the bunt, and then they go for analysis for sea lice, either in my lab or the Center for Aquatic Health Sciences. Couple different ways this is done. When we sample in Clayoquot, we sample off in a Howsett crew boat. So we jump off the front of the crew boat onto the beach, and then they do a big set with backing the net out of the back of the boat. So it makes it a bit more complicated. I don't know what you guys use here. Is it a similar small boat, or do you use a bigger boat? We're going to deal with this guy. If you have followed social media at all regarding wild salmon and sea lice, you've seen this fish. This fish was originally portrayed as a chum out of Mushlood Inlet in Nootka Island. It then showed up in media as a pink in Okasolo Channel from above Quadra Island by Campbell River. It then was portrayed as a sockeye salmon, also from the Discovery Islands region in media. So it's been all sorts of different types of salmon. It's been from all sorts of different places on our coast. We'll deal with it in a minute. And I'm going to show you how many times a fish like this actually occurs in the Broughton Archipelago. Quickly, just so we know what we're talking about, and I'm going to talk about sea lice in a couple different ways and deal with them with a couple different things. This is a life history diagram, very similar to what Dr. Jones showed you. These are we're going to loop copeptids in with the non-motile or the juvenile stages of sea lice. They attach to the fish with a frontal filament. I'll show you how big those are in a little bit. And then these are the adults or the motile. They move around on the fish. And most people recognize sea lice when we say sea lice, like that picture I showed you, the adults. You think of the adults, they're the ones you see on your adult salmon. They're the large brown masses that are down by the anal fin of your fish. I'm going to talk about sea lice as in how many adults are on fish, and also about how many lice are on fish, irregardless of their life history stage. So in other words, any from right here at copeptid all the way through to our largest adults. So I'll group them all together. There's a number of different species. We typically see Lepiopteria salmonis or Caligus clemensi on our juvenile salmon. I am going to lump them all together, and we're just going to talk about all lice. Okay, so we're basically going to be talking about how many of the fish have adult lice, how many fish have lice at all of the stages grouped together. Here's our fish again. I'm going to compare it to what's going on in the Broughton Archipelago. I'm going to show you two sets of data from the Broughton Archipelago. The first one is this. It's Salmon Coast data. They're an NGO group. They were originally started by Alexander Morton. A few other people are on the board now. This is their sea lice report from 2021. Their data is available online from 2001 through to 2021. Their 2022 data isn't up yet. In their 2021 report, as they've been moving farms out of the Broughton Archipelago, the report said sea lice numbers on juvenile salmon in 2021 were comparable to levels over the last 5 years and higher than in the period between 2008 and 2014. That statement matches what we've been monitoring in the Broughton Archipelago as well. They monitor at 3 locations in the Broughton Archipelago. Between March and July, they collect and they live lice their fish. They look at them with a hand lens in the field and then release them, chum, pink, and sockeye. In their database, they got 44,529 samples. I'm going to deal with just the chum. In this case, 15,804 samples. Okay, 15,000 fish. I've done this with all their fish, and it comes out to basically the same. How many look like this? And I'm not even going to go that far. I'm going to count up the adult lice on there. There's 15 on that side. How many fish have 15 or more adult lice in their database? 6 out of 15,000. 1 out of every 2,635 of the fish they capture in the Broughton Archipelago, not me, I'll show you mine later. 1 out of every 2,635, or 0.04% of their fish look like that fish. If we do this over all of the areas we monitor on the whole coast, we get pretty much the same thing. Do those fish exist? They do. Our monitoring in Clayoquot Sound since 2016, we have almost 5,000 chum. We have 2 fish that have over 15 adult lice on them. They both have 18. Cedar Coast, the other NGO group that monitors in Clayoquot Sound, they have about 2,500 samples between 2018 and 21. They have 1 fish with more than 15 adult lice on it. It has 16. So if I just say how many of Salmon Coast chum have just 1 adult louse on them, I get 412, or 2.6% of their fish have 1 adult lice. A little over 14,000 of them don't have an adult louse on them. None at all. Okay, they do have lice, they just don't have an adult louse. So almost 90% of the fish sampled by Salmon Coast in the Broughton Archipelago over the last 20 years don't have a single adult louse on them. If I look at their data, same data, 15,804 chum, and I look at their data and I pull out how many just have lice in general, okay? All the stages. 55% of them don't have any lice. Another 22.5% have 1. 11% have 2, 3, or 5% have 3, and down we go, okay? So Salmon Coast data, 90% don't have an adult louse, 77.3 have 1 or fewer lice. So according to Salmon Coast data, this is what the majority of the fish leaving the Broughton Archipelago look like. I took this image. It's supposed to be chum in Okasolo in 2020 after all the farms were removed. I've circled all the lice that are on there because there's still lice on them. And about 50% of them are infected with 1 or 2 early stage non-motile C1 or C2 lice, those little guys there. Just so you get an idea on what most of the lice we're looking at on juvenile fish look like. A couple images. These are from chum in my lab, probably about 40 millimeters, so 4 centimeters long. The far picture is a couple of copeptids, the earliest infectious stage. This is a late stage non-motile C2, and I've got a couple on the ruler there, so you can see them right in the middle. They're about 1 to 2 millimeters long, okay? And they attach with the filament, and they hang off the side of the fish. If we look at the data that's been collected in the Broughton since 2016, the Broughton has had a ton of monitoring going on in it. Between 2003 and 2009, DFO in this area and the whole bunch of night inlet that's off the map here did 100 beach seines and somewhere around 70 purse seines once a month. I got to do that enjoyable job. It was, I'm not sure anyone would ever do it again. Between 2010 and 2012, another group did something called the BAMP project where they sampled about somewhere between 100 and 68 beach seine sites for those 3 years. And then nothing was done kind of 2013, 14, 15 as far as industry monitoring. And then in 2015, and you've heard that year through some of the other sea lice presentations, I kind of call it the rebirth of sea lice. It was a really licey year everywhere, and we'll see it in your data. That kick-started it again. So 2016, we started this process. So those red dots are the 45 sites that I do industry supported as we monitor in the Broughton Archipelago. This is just something I pulled out for fun from the Broughton. Those are 3 of our sites, the G for Glacier Falls, the V for Viner Sound, and the D for Denham Island. Denham Island was where Alex Morton released a video that said, "No farms, no lice," in 2020. Our data shows that right around that area, there's 60%, 42%, and 58% of the fish, the chum that we sampled, were infested with lice. So no farms, still lice. And we'll talk about background level in a little bit. Salmon Coast data, if I pull out that same site, looks just like this. In fact, that year they reported their highest infected site was at Glacier at the G with 60%. Okay. They also reported in that report I showed you that no site consistently had the highest infestation week to week or from sample to sample. It moved around. Okay, so here's my fish. There's a louse on this guy right there. Okay, that's kind of typical of what we see. We have between 2016 and 2021, 2,347 chum. 9 of them have more than one adult louse, or 0.4% have an adult louse or more. And 97% of them don't have any adult lice. If I look at our data from that period in terms of all life stages, 76% have no lice, 15% have one, and then we cascade down through more lice. And yes, we have the odd fish, 0.0%, that has 5 or more. These numbers, and you should keep these numbers in mind when we get to the Klemtu data. So 97% don't have an adult louse, 90% have one or less of any stage. Okay, enough of that. This is the Klemtu data I was given. Again, not my data. So I worked it as best I could. There may be some stuff missing, like I think 2021 data is missing out of there. So sampling started in 2005, and in the data I was given, April, May, and June, occasionally into July, I believe, 16 locations. The possibly 24 is because there's a few sites that appear rarely by name, and I'm not sure if those were just added for 1 year and then discarded. But I think you've settled there, and you tell me you've settled kind of on 16 sites now, about, or? Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some sites that are weather dependent, whether you get to them all the time and everything. Yeah. Yeah. Collect chum, pink, sockeye, or Chinook, and coho. And again, they're collected and they're sent to the Center for Aquatic Health Sciences down in Campbell River, where they count in species of lice. So we're just going to deal with counts. Map of your sites. There's a couple sites missing off the bottom, but you get the general idea. It's kind of like the Broughton in the fact that it's a nice distribution of sites near farms, away from farms, pre-farms, post-farms, that kind of thing. And there's a data set I was given. So I ended up with 23,886 juvenile salmon samples. 15,000 of them were pink salmon, 8,240 were chum salmon, 132 were coho, and 6 were juvenile Chinook. So I'll just deal with pink and chum. These are your pink numbers, all grouped together, all years, a little over 15,000 pinks. 80.9% of them have no lice, 11% have one, 3.5, 1.5, and it cascades down from there. There's a few that had lots of lice, and right? But the vast majority, almost 81%, had no lice. If I looked at just adult lice, and remember that 94, 95% that was in the Broughton, 92.7% of your juvenile pink didn't have any adult lice on them, and 92.1% had one or less. Okay? Things are looking pretty good. What does this tell us, though, right, about juvenile pink? Dr. Jones alluded to 7.5 lice per pink could have had a mortality event. There's some other work by a gentleman, Dr. Tony Farrell, out of UBC, way back in about 2016. I think that paper came out, maybe before. They found that what was a C3 LEP, one of the later stages of the non-motiles, attached to a pink salmon that was 0.5 grams or less, had some impairments, some non-lethal effects. It didn't swim as well, had some regulation issues as far as osmotics and stuff. So I was going to do that. And then I was like, well, that's kind of complex. And really it boiled down to, I got to sort this huge data set again by how heavy they are and how many lice of different stages they have. So what I thought instead is what's critical to this 80.9% is, and it's really hard to tease out, and I think some people have been trying to do it, tease out how many lice are coming from farms and how many aren't. And I'm never going to stand up here and say lice aren't coming from farms. That's an impossibility, right? They are a source of lice. What we want to know is what's the background infestation on sea lice that fish in Klemtu had before the farms went here? Was it 80.9%? Was it 95% had no lice before farms got here? That's kind of critical. And if we had, great forethought and we were like, well, we're thinking about putting some farms up in Klemtu, and we could think of all the issues that would go around, maybe we would have ran around for 5 years and collected a whole bunch of background data that would have been great. We would have had baseline data. We have to factor into our baseline data that things change from year to year with sea lice. Salinity is different, temperature is different. The natural sources which exist, the different species that host sea lice, their populations change. So our baseline has to happen over a relatively long period of time. We don't really have a lot of good baselines. Most of our monitoring is focused around aquaculture sites. We have a couple of decent ones in Quatsino. We have 3 sites that are well over 40 kilometers away from where the farms are, but they experience a little bit different freshwater input, and they're a little bit different kind of salinity levels than right out by our farms. So in an ideal world, and Dr. Jones said he'd like to find what the other natural sources are. That's one on my books. The other one is to get some more background areas. Where could we use that would match kind of the migration pattern of juvenile fish and also the water quality of juvenile fish? Is the outer end of Rivers Inlet, would it be comparable to where you are here? But then we have to worry about how many fish are migrating past from Port Hardy, and they've already been exposed to farms. So is the southern end of Quadra Island in the Gulf Islands down by Nanaimo, is that going to be a good background site? Is Alberni Inlet, which doesn't have aquaculture anymore, near Ucluelet, is that a good background lice measurement for Clayoquot Sound? Would Cayucit work on the west coast of Vancouver Island? These are things that we need to get background levels for. So kind of the best baseline background, no farm impact area we have is south of Quadra Island and Campbell River. Okay, this is one of our other areas we monitor. These 7 sites that we monitor, there's a little research facility here, a little Chinook research facility that could contribute, but those 7 sites are well away from any aquaculture facilities. So we've been monitoring there since 2016. So I'm going to use that area and our data as a background level. It should match salinity fairly well to what's going on up here. The other thing I have here is I have some work by Price, Alexander Morton, and Reynolds published in 2010. They monitored in 2007 and 2008 right in here, and then 2 sites way up in Butte Inlet for their background infestation, so what they called pre-exposure. So I have that data to look at. So what I did then was just took all your pink data and pulled it out by year and did how many pinks had 0 lice. So in 2005, we had almost 96% had no lice. In 2015, which we've heard lots, 36% of them had no lice. That means that 64% of them had lice. Okay, and then last year we were at 80. That 80% had no lice. Here's our background, or our natural. We're going to make our natural background. So up in the top corner there, you'll see that 2007, 2008. That's Alexandra Morton and Price. They found on juvenile pink in their pre-exposure area, 67 to 81% didn't have lice. Our monitoring in south of Discovery Island since 2017, 70% to 87% of the fish we catch there don't have lice. So somewhere between 13 and 30% of our pinks south of Quadra Island before they pass any farms have a louse. If I take those numbers and that spread, so 67 to 87, and put it over your samples by year, and we say this is going to be our natural background level of lice as best as we can do with the data we have, that's where your fish fall. So most years, you're within that band, right? So is the farm impact, if there is one or is not, is it measurable compared to background levels? We have a couple that are close, and we have this 2015 with pink that it was basically province-wide, right? And then I don't have 2021, although it does exist somewhere. So it looks pretty good. Okay? Does that make sense? Sweet. Okay. Then I went by site. All right. Is there one site that sticks out? Is there any couple sites that stick out? You guys will have to tell me where those are because I don't really know. Same pink background infestation south of Quadra, been used by sampling by myself and by Alexander Morton and Al. And we throw that over, and there's all your sites with the same background level. We're assuming that's natural infestation, somewhere in that range, maybe higher one year, lower another year. But if we're in there, I think we're doing pretty good. And there's a couple, Lower Tolme and Myers Pass, that are below. There's one that's close, Upper Tolme. The rest kind of fall in. Upper Laredo is really good. That probably makes sense. Carter Bay. Okay. You can do the same thing with chum. Here's your chum data, 8,000 of them, 79%, 11%, 3.8, 2, 1, 0.7, 2.6. Okay, that cascading thing. I go anywhere in the province and I look at sea lice data on wild juvenile fish. I come out long-term monitoring, lots of sites, really close to these numbers. It's just what it is. Okay, so your chum, 95% had no lice. 89.9 had one or less any stage. Right around 90. Here it is year to year. 2005, I didn't have any chum. 2007, I had 4. 2008, I had 27. So I left them out because we didn't have very many in 2021. So looks pretty good. We're going to use the south of Quadra. The numbers are a little bit different for chum. And again, this is from Price et al. In 2010. It's 70 to 85%. And from the data we've collected, south of Quadra is 72 to 89. And if we overlay that, looks pretty good. Okay, so if that's natural background, it falls in that range. 2015, you've heard it all everywhere. And we also heard, which is interesting, is 2013 a couple times. So I'm not sure what's going on in 2013 because we didn't see it kind of province-wide. Okay. And then by site, same range, and we throw it in, and we see very similar things. So pink and chum are kind of going the same route. A little bit lower at Carter Bay for chum than pink, and this could go to Dr. Jones's, pinks being less so than chum. But it seems like it's not too bad. So if we do the same thing and we just throw all the fish in the database together, so 2005 to 2022, 23,886 samples. That's a pretty good database. It's a pretty good sample set. It's probably the 5th largest in the province. And I look at how many have an adult louse. 1, not 15, just 1. 93% do not have an adult lice on them. 80.3 don't have any louse of any stage. This is a little bit different than what we talked about because it's got some Chinook and some coho thrown in there. And if we say, well, do they even have one? 91.1 have 1 or less lice. And that is all I have to show you. This is my stuff, my contact. If you have a question that we don't get to, or if you don't want to speak and ask a question, you can track me down at the end and then I'll talk. Or just email me, call me. Hey, I saw you at a presentation. I have this question. I'll try and answer. As long as the data is publicly available, I can talk to it. As you can tell, I kind of like talking about sea lice. Me, my kids, and sea lice. Those are the three things I don't mind talking about all the time. So if you don't want to bring a question up here, feel free to get a hold of me anytime. Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been great up here.